Have you ever imagined dying for a few minutes and returning with an urgent message from Jesus, warning against the new pope? What if the peace the world celebrates is actually the greatest spiritual deception of our age? In today's video, you will learn about the shocking account of Pastor William Granger, who had a direct vision with Jesus and saw what was about to happen to the church. If this message touches you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments which city you are watching. My name is Pastor William Granger. I'm 57 years old and have lived practically my entire life in Texas. If you knew me before, you would know that I was the kind of man who didn't get carried away by visions or conspiracy theories. But what I saw when my heart stopped for 12 minutes changed everything and made me see the world as it really is. It was an ordinary Sunday. I was preaching from the book of Acts in the middle of a series called Return to Origins. The church was full, and as always I ended with an altar call. But that day when I reached out and quoted, "Repent, for the kingdom has come," I felt a pain tearing through my chest. I couldn't complete the sentence. The light in the eyes of the congregation was the last thing I saw. I fell to the floor between the benches as everything went dark. But I didn't delete. Not the way the doctors describe it. On the contrary, I woke up. I saw myself standing before the altar looking at my own lying body. Nobody moved. Everything was frozen like a living photograph. A sound of wind passed through the church, although no windows were open. I looked up and saw the roof of the church disappear as if it were made of smoke, revealing a strange sky. It was neither day nor night. It was like an eternal dusk, heavy, thick, and that's where it all started. A light enveloped me, not a warm light, but a cold one. It wasn't the brightness of the sky I imagined. It was as if someone wanted to show me something before it was too late. A voice came out of nowhere, a voice that broke the silence like restrained thunder. "You have preached about my name, but there is something you have not yet seen." I was pulled, to a place that didn't seem like this world. Tall buildings with golden domes, people smiling, holding mixed religious symbols, crosses, moons, chakras, QR codes, and in the center, a man, the new Pope, Leo XIV. And Jesus said to me, with a pain that echoed in the bones of my soul, "He was chosen, but not by me." I recognized his face instantly. It was the new Pope, Leo XIV, the American Cardinal Robert Prevost. He was elected just a few days earlier, and headlines around the world celebrated that moment as the new era of inclusive faith. But there, in that place where time seemed suspended and the spirit could not lie, the glow around him gave me chills. He was standing in the center of a square that seemed to be made of living glass. There were thousands of people around, of all religions, of all cultures. They sang together a soft, mesmerizing melody. There were no crosses. There was no Bible, just a gigantic image of him projected into the sky, with the words, "One love, one religion, one shepherd." And that was when I first felt what I can only describe as spiritual nausea. Those words seemed beautiful, but they sounded like honey-coated poison. My spirit retreated, but my body did not obey me. It was like I was being taken deeper, forced to see something my eyes didn't want to see, but my soul needed to understand. The Pope's face changed. Sometimes it was him, smiling, serene, paternal. Other times, his face seemed to slide off like a liquid mask, revealing features that were not human. The eyes were dark. The lips moved, but the sound came from another mouth, deeper, older. He spoke, and every word he said was a denial of a truth I knew. You don't need to convert, just love. Sin is a cultural concept overcome by spiritual evolution. Christ was a symbol, but now we are all Christ. These sentences sounded like distorted thunder, and the instant they were spoken, crowds knelt down, but their eyes became blank. It was like seeing a harvest of souls being harvested before me, not by the sword but by illusion. And then Jesus appeared, not like in paintings. He did not come with a crown or white robe. He appeared behind me, without saying a word, but the sound of his presence ripped through the scenery like it was paper. The ground shook. The sky above cracked. Jesus' gaze fell on Leo XIV, and he cried. Not with tears in my eyes, but with pain so deep that the air became thick. Jesus then said, "This is not my enemy, but neither is he my shepherd. He loves the world more than the truth. He welcomes everyone but does not point the way. He unites but without conversion. He is the wide door, the comfortable gospel, religion without the cross." At that moment, something inside me broke. I had spent my entire life believing that when deception came it would be ugly, obvious, evil. But no. The deception was beautiful. It was sweet. It was seductive. And I was in front of him. Jesus touched my shoulder and whispered, "Take a good look, because the whole world is already following you." As soon as Jesus spoke, everything around me began to deform. That square of glass, which once seemed heavenly, now curved like a wet mirror. The applause of the crowds became metallic echoes like gears in an invisible machine. And the air, previously sweet, began to exude something that mixed burnt incense with rusty iron. It was like breathing inside a cathedral that had lost its soul. I was taken, without walking, to an underground room. I didn't see him with my eyes, but with something inside me. It was as if my spirit was being led into the heart of the system behind that false gospel. In the center, a gigantic throne made of black smoke and broken mirrors. Sitting there again was Leo XIV, but he no longer looked human that I had seen before. He still wore papal robes, white with gold embroidery, but now they seemed fused to his skin, as if they were part of his body. The smile remained, calm, welcoming. But your eyes, the eyes, they were like bottomless pits full of voices, not human voices. I heard mixed sentences in several languages said in unison. Religion is a social construction. The cross is a symbol of oppression. True faith is the acceptance of all truths. Christ will not return. We replaced it. Behind the throne, a figure was standing. Property, dark, with folded wings and a cloak that seemed to be made of liquid shadows. His eyes were open wounds and his mouth never moved. But every word the Pope spoke was born from his presence. It was as if the throne spoke through him. How if the spirit behind the throne had found its perfect voice? And then I understood. It was not possession. It was a partnership. Leo XIV was not an evil man. I sincerely believed in what he said. And it was this sincerity that made everything so dangerous. He did not preach error with malice, but with conviction. He was not the wolf. He was the shepherd seduced by the wolf dressed in light. Jesus, who was next to me, remained silent. But the pain in his expression was clearer than 1,000 words. That's when I saw around the throne rows and rows of religious leaders, politicians, artists, influencers, all with an invisible seal on their forehead. They smiled. They were admired by the world. Each carried a piece of the new doctrine, global spiritual union, where no truth is exclusive and no faith is superior. And behind them, crowds, millions, billions, all at peace, everyone calm, all convinced that they had found the true gospel, the gospel without the cross, without sacrifice, without exclusivity, a Christ who blesses everything but confronts nothing. That's when Jesus spoke again, and his words went through me like a blade. They don't follow you out of malice. They follow him because he tells them what they want to hear. And he added, "But this throne is not mine. This gospel does not save. This pastor does not guide my flock. He lulls them into eternal sleep." And with that, the ground beneath the throne's feet began to crack. But it wasn't the end yet. The ground beneath the throne began to crack, yes. But it wasn't collapsing. It was as if the ground itself was hesitant to break what the whole world had begun to adore. I was pulled in again. Not by angels, not by hands, but for something deeper, as if the truth had a mind of its own and dragged me deeper into the spiritual basement of the world. A city appeared before me, a place that seemed sacred but was void of presence. It was called Ecclesia Vitra, the glass church. Everything there was beautiful, crystal domes, soft lights, white marble hallways, but there were no crosses, there was no altar, only a holographic image floating in the center, the smiling face of Pope Leo XIV, repeating phrases like a mantra. We are all one. The Spirit of Christ indwells every sincere belief. Truth is flexible like love. People applauded. They sang. They were emotional. Some even cried. But there was something terribly wrong. There were no bent knees. There were no tears of regret. Everything was celebration, but no redemption. Faith had transformed into sensory experience. Emotion had replaced holiness. People were united, but no one was saved. And then Jesus appeared there between the glass corridors. His bare feet made no noise, but every time he touched the floor cracked. One by one, the holograms began to shake. The image of Leo XIV flickered, as if it were losing strength in the face of the true light. Jesus looked at me and said, "You are seeing the church the world wants, but she's not my fiancée. She is beautiful on the outside, but she has no blood because he doesn't know sacrifice." It was then that I was taken to the underground of that city of glass. And down there, hidden in the shadows, there was a second church, small, poorly lit, with damp-stained walls. Inside, I saw a group of people kneeling, silent, crying, holding torn Bibles with hands covered in calluses and faces marked by fasting. They didn't have big speeches, they had no resources, but the Spirit hovered over them like an invisible fire. Each prayer seemed to open cracks in the ceiling above them. And then I understood. The true church is not admired. She is ignored, hidden, rejected. She doesn't appear on magazine covers. It is not a trending topic. But she's the only one who bleeds with Christ. Jesus pointed upwards, where the image of the Pope still trembled, projected on the glass domes, and said in a firm voice, "The world applauds what shines, but my kingdom comes in the dark. Flee from the light that reveals no sins. It doesn't come from heaven." At that moment, I heard a sound, like bells in reverse, ringing from the bottom up. It was a warning, one spiritual calling for those who could still see. And before I could ask, Jesus said, "The separation began, and time is shorter than you imagine." The glass throne began to shatter, and the blood appeared. But it was not the blood of martyrs. It was the blood of souls who had exchanged truth for comfort. After the glass church began to shatter, I was pulled by an invisible force. But this time I wasn't taken upstairs. I was dragged inside, as if he was diving into the spiritual core of everything he had seen. The air changed. It became dense, metallic. Time seemed to slow down, as if each second was too heavy to pass by. I entered a long, narrow hallway, made of dark, cold stone, but each stone had something engraved on it. As I got closer, I realized that they were names, thousands, millions, written in all languages. But there was something that cut me inside. Names were slowly being erased, as if an invisible breeze passed by and crossed them one by one. At the end of the hall, there was a seated figure. Yes, him again. Leo XIV. But now without pomp, uncrowned, no throne. Just him, with a golden quill in his hand and a book in front of him. It was a holy book, or at least it seemed to be. But something about him was wrong. The pages were blank, and every time he spoke one of his phrases, those same sweet, inclusive, reassuring phrases, a name disappeared from the wall. Everyone is already saved. They just don't know it. Hell is a metaphor created by primitive minds. Blood is no longer necessary as we have evolved into consciousness. With each of those words, I felt like the ground beneath my feet was burning. And the names were disappearing, not because someone erased them in anger. They dissolved by choice, out of indifference, for abandonment. Jesus was by my side again, but now his gaze was like silent fire. He pointed to the names and said, "These are the ones who traded my word for convenience. They did not reject me with hatred. They just stopped believing that I'm necessary." Then he looked directly at Leo XIV, and his words were like quiet thunder. "You are not my enemy, but you've deleted more names than any stalker." And at that moment, Leo XIV cried. Not human tears. It was as if he was crying in memory, as if he knew that one day he had his name in that hallway, and now he didn't even know if he was still there. The hallway began to close. The walls began to move as if time was compressing. I tried to run to the names, try to save them, scream, do something, but Jesus held my arm and said with a pain that went through my spirit, "Now it's too late for many, because many heard and didn't care." On the wall that still stood, I saw a name being written with light. Just one. It wasn't mine, not even that of a pope, not even a pastor. It was a child's name, and next to it, a sentence. She believed when no one else did. Then everything shook, and the hallway disappeared, but I knew what I had seen. The new gospel does not take names violently. It dissolves them gently. I thought I had seen everything, but I was fooled even in that. I was pulled again, this time not by force or light, but by a strange music, soft and slow, which seemed to come from 1,000 voices singing at the same time, all beautiful, all in tune, and all fake. It was as if the sound was spiritual makeup, the soundtrack of a lie. I was placed in a huge auditorium. The walls pulsed with energy. It looked like a cross between a cathedral and a theater, with columns stretching into the sky and holographic screens floating in the air. In the center, a ceremony was about to take place. And there he came, Leo and the people. The people applauded standing up. Everyone said in unison, "He brought us together. He is the sign of the new time. Blessed is he who speaks in the name of inclusion, peace without the cross, love without dogma, salvation without Christ." I wanted to scream, but my voice didn't come out. At the altar, a crown waited. Not a crown of gold, but one made of artificial light. And next to it, a book. Not the Bible, but a universal gospel, a synthetic text with excerpts from the great religions united by neutral, politically correct, sweet phrases, and spiritually empty. Leo XIV knelt, and a fallen angel, not a grotesque demon, but a creature too beautiful to be trusted, he placed the crown on his head. A glow appeared. The crowd exploded in praise. And at that moment, Jesus appeared not on the stage, but between the last benches, invisible to everyone, except me. He didn't smile. He didn't interrupt, just watched. And in his gaze, there was something I will never forget. Sadness for someone you love and knows they will be betrayed. He looked at me and said, "That's not my fiancée. She is the lover of the world. She wears holy words but dances with the system." Then he extended his arm and showed me something behind the altar, a half-open door. Behind her, a woman on her knees, dirty, root, in silence. She wore no jewelry, sang no hymns, was not applauded. But in his hands was a wooden rosary, and on his lap an old Bible, open to the book of Revelation. And although no one saw her, she cried for those who were at the ceremony. Jesus said, "That's my fiancée. She doesn't have a stage. She has no influence. But he is faithful." I fell to my knees, not for glory, but out of shame. I had been a pastor for decades, and I realized that much of what I thought of as church was just the antechamber of that ceremony. And then I heard the voice of Jesus stronger than anything. "They chose a false crown of light, but mine is still made of thorns. And whoever loves me chooses to suffer with the truth rather than be applauded by the lie." The ceremony continued, but I knew. Heaven's countdown had begun. The ceremony ended with a global ovation. There were no longer distinctions between religions, nations, doctrines. It was as if the whole world, at least the world I saw, had decided to forget Jesus' words to embrace the more convenient version of him. Leo XIII rose from the altar with his crown still shining. But something started to change. The light around you has not disappeared. She reorganized herself. It was as if small beams of energy came out of it and spread across the planet. I saw people receiving these beams as invisible spiritual marks. They smiled. Some cried with joy, others fell to their knees. But none of them saw Jesus. Because in that world, Jesus was no longer needed. And that's when everything went dark. The light in the hall was suddenly turned off, as if someone had turned off the set. The altar disappeared. The smiling faces are gone. I was left in a wide, cold field shrouded in shadows. Shadows that moved like living smoke. And in the center, a throne. It wasn't the same as before. This was an empty throne, made of molten metal with inscriptions that glowed red like burning coals. And over him hung a crown, the same one that Leo XIV had used, but now split in half. It was then that I saw 7 figures approaching the throne. None of them had faces. They all wore black cloaks with occult symbols sewn into the fabric. His eyes were glowing holes like lanterns in a dark tunnel. They gathered around the throne and placed their hands on it. And a voice, not human, echoed above me. The throne is almost ready. What governs now is just the shadow of what will come. Jesus appeared at my side. Silent. Property. I looked at him, waiting for an answer, but his eyes were fixed on the throne. It was then that he said, Leo XIV is not the end. He is the bridge. He is the one who prepares the way, not because of malice, but because of omission. The new world religion will not come with swords. It will come with smiles. At this moment, an image formed in the sky above the throne. It was the face of Leo XIII, yes, but behind him there was another face, darker, more refined, more dangerous. A face that was not yet known, but that was already being awaited. And it was as if the Spirit said to me without words, when the world tires of peace, it will desire order, and the true throne will be occupied. The scene dissolved like smoke. And I understood. The true spiritual plan was not to exalt Leo XIII, but to use him as a pavement for someone greater. One who will come when everyone believes they have found their truth. And at that moment I saw 2 words written in the sky. Replacement accepted. Jesus closed his eyes and he said, Now look where there is still truth. And I was taken again. I was led by Jesus out of that dense darkness, where the empty throne still pulsed with false promises. The scenery changed almost imperceptibly. First the sound came back, then the light. But it wasn't a stage light, nor the artificial lights of the ceremony. A soft light, like a candle forgotten in a cellar. And then I saw it. No big crowds, not shining temples. I saw simple houses, small rooms, caves, sheds, basements of abandoned churches, people kneeling in circles with worn-out Bibles in their hands. They didn't wear special clothes. They didn't have microphones. They had no online following, but they had something that none of the other places had. Presence. The real presence of the Spirit. Jesus said to me, They have no influence. They have no media, but they have my heart. They don't preach to please. They preach to wake up. I saw a woman in a forest in Canada kneeling alone in front of a tree stump. She prayed with her hands on the ground and tears in her eyes. Nobody listened to her, but the entire sky was silent because of her. I saw a young man in the Middle East hidden inside a hole excavated in rocks, holding a sheet printed with an excerpt from the Gospel of John. He kissed that paper as if it were the body of Christ, himself. I saw children in Africa praying in silence, holding hands, not knowing if their parents would return alive from the last secret meeting. And still they smiled with their eyes closed as if they had already seen Jesus face to face. Jesus pointed to each of them. This is my church. Nobody interviews them. Nobody sponsors them. Nobody listens to them. But they are the ones who sustain the earth. And then I saw something that made me tremble. Every time one of these hidden Christians prayed, a crack appeared in the shiny structures of the false church. Every time someone refused to repeat the slogans of the new gospel, a stone fell from the false temple. They were few, weak in the eyes of the world, but they were like yeast in the middle of the dough. Invisible, but incorruptible. That was when Jesus spoke, now with a firm voice. As long as there is one faithful heart, my kingdom still lives on earth. They will not be recognized by the world, but they will be called by my name on the day of separation. And then he looked at me, straight into the eyes, and asked, "Do you want to return to the stage or to the dust, to applause or loyalty? Because the truth will not be popular, and whoever walks with me will be left out." Didn't respond. I just cried. And at that moment I saw something written on the walls of the sky. The truth doesn't scream, but it burns. The flame still lived. After I saw the hidden church, alive and faithful, I thought that would be the end. That I had finally seen what God wanted to show. But Jesus said to me, "You saw where the truth lies. Now you need to see what happens to whoever exchanged it." And I was taken back, but not to the glass altar. No, to the throne of smoke. This time I was transported to a place between two worlds. It looked like a valley, but without a floor. A field suspended in nothingness, where thousands of people walked in 3 different directions, exactly like a spiritual crossroads. Each direction had a door. The first was gigantic, of metal and glass. Above it, the words, "Door to Unity." The same one used by Leo XIV during his coronation. Thousands entered there smiling, men of all religions, priests and pastors, rabbis, and monks, theologians and philosophers, people with positions, with titles. They sang together, all marked with an invisible seal on the forehead. When the light hit, you could see clearly. It looked like code, a symbol, a number. The second, darker, was smaller, dark stone with ancient runes and languages. Above it, it read, "Door to Evolution." There people came in robes with esoteric symbols, mixing technology with mysticism. They spoke of new consciousness, cosmic Christ, golden age. They also smiled. They also believed they had found the truth. But it was the third door that stopped me. She was almost invisible, hidden among thorns, low, narrow, above it a simple inscription, "Path of Blood." And there they were, those who had refused the seal, that they had been persecuted, forgotten, who still carried crosses on their backs, not symbolic, but real. Some were injured, others covered in dust, but everyone with eyes full of light. And behind them walked Jesus, with firm steps, silent, but with eyes only focused on the last ones. He did not lead with distance, but walked among them, touching the wounded, helping the tired, consoling those who cried, and every step of his left a trail of living light on the floor. That's when the voice, not his, but a heavenly voice, echoed above the valley. Time is up. Now the separation begins. And something indescribable happened. The doors sealed, the first and second with burst of applause, the third with the sound of a lament and of glory. Jesus turned to me, and his eyes were teary, not from pain, but of justice. "I," called everyone, But not everyone wanted to come. They preferred the religion that made them comfortable over me, which called them to die. And then he pointed up. In the sky, a writing was formed, made of fire. Now it's late to choose, but the choice was free. And below, in the land, the crowds that had entered the first 2 doors began to sing. But the song was now cold, empty, repetitive. They didn't realize they had crossed an invisible border. They had chosen a Christ without a cross. And now they could no longer hear the voice of the real one. Jesus held my hand. You saw it. Now speak. And we started walking towards the 3rd door. When I stepped into the 3rd door, I felt like everything inside me, everything I thought I knew about the gospel, ministry, salvation, was about to be broken and rebuilt. The door was too small to walk through. I had to kneel. I had to empty myself. And when I crossed, I did not enter a temple nor a city. I entered a desert. Yes, a desert. Arid, silent, without signs, without direction. But there, God's presence was so dense that it suffocated pride. Jesus walked ahead, but now not like a master, and yes, how a lamb that had been killed but was standing. The marks were there, the pierced hands, the open side, the dried blood was still visible, as if it had no interest in appearing clean. He did not shine like the false shepherds. He bled like a real savior. Around, small camps of faithful believers, not imposing churches, not structures, just broken, redeemed people with their eyes fixed on him. They read the Bible as if every word was the last water before eternal thirst. They prayed with their faces to the ground. They fasted not to receive blessings, but to hear the voice. It was there that Jesus stopped and turned to me for the last time. And with a voice that didn't scream, but shook all eternity within me, he said, "You saw the fake. Now you've seen the real thing. There is no middle ground." Leo XIV is not the Antichrist, but it's the paver, the herald of false unity, the architect of a bloodless peace. He seduces with beauty, with inclusion, but the path he points out ends where I will not be. So I tell you, don't listen to him. Not because he is evil, but because he doesn't represent me. He is the pastor of the majority, but he is not my bride's pastor. And at that moment, Jesus raised his hand, and a line of fire appeared on the horizon. On one side, crowds, on the other, the few, the dirty ones, the tired ones, but also the chosen ones. And he said, "The separation is silent, but it is eternal." Then everything around me started to disappear. The faces, the landscapes, even the sound. I was left in a blank space where only one sentence floated, written in letters that pulsed with life. If the world applauds you, ask yourself, what God are you talking about? I felt my spirit being pulled back, violently and tenderly at the same time. And there the vision ended. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.